Okay, well, welcome. Thank you for joining our mental health talk here at the MCBC. My name is Ken, I'm one of the pastors here at the church, and our goal here is to simply try to break the stigma of silence as it pertains to mental health, and that we don't simply brush people off or avoid the subject, but that we do lean in and give space for safe dialogue. I have a guest with me here. Her name's Elizabeth. I'm going to let her do the introductions for herself.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm a registered clinical psychologist in the province of Ontario.
And before we go any further, we just need to make sure we put up some disclaimers. So Elizabeth's going to do that for us right now.
Yes. I do want to mention that this video is for information only, and it's not psychotherapy. All statements and information included in this video is intended for educational or informational purposes, and it should not be taken as any form of treatment or substituted for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, nor diagnosis or treatment. Please seek the advice of your family physician or another medical doctor if you have any questions regarding any kind of medical concerns. Should you have any questions pertaining to psychological issues, please reach out and connect to qualified mental health providers. If you think you're in need of immediate assistance, please call 911 or visit your local hospital emergency room. If you are in distress and need emotional support, please access the mental health crisis hotline listed in your local phone book's government pages. The 24-hour crisis lines for Toronto and Greater Toronto area, they will be included in the description box below. Okay.
Great. So our time today, we'll be talking about the topic of grief. And grief is very interesting during this time, as grief at its core, I think, is just how we deal with loss. And we have lost so much during COVID. So Elizabeth, why don't you share with us a bit, what is grief? How are maybe we experiencing grief in so many different ways since the pandemic has hit?
Right. Yes. And so grief is that emotional, cognitive, behavior response to any kind of loss, right? And this can be the loss of a loved one. It can be a loss to the usual routine, going to the gym, right? It could be, just any kind of change where we experience a loss. And I do want to kind of differentiate it from mourning. I think when we refer to mourning, it's more so perhaps the cultural and social kind of traditions or rituals that we do when someone passes away.
Oh, I never really thought about how mourning and grief kind of work hand in hand, and how they're different too. Well, thanks for clearing that up. I mean, okay, with grief, there are the stages of grief. Some of us are familiar with, and some of us are not. What are the various stages of grief that we can be familiar with, I guess?
Yes, I believe you're referring to Kubler-Ross's theory. Okay, so Kubler-Ross, a psychiatrist, she created a grief theory regarding when we lose a loved one. So that first stage is denial. So being in complete denial that this person just died. That second stage is being angry, okay, anger. So it's just so unfair. Why did this person have to die? Okay. Third stage is bargaining. So it's that, okay, well, what can I do? I must be able to do something so I can bring that person back. Okay. Fourth stage is depression. So just that wave of sadness, just feeling so low and down because of the loss of this loved one. And then that fifth stage is acceptance. So coming to terms, accepting reality that, okay, this person did pass away. Now, I do want to mention that it's a very big misconception that grief is a linear process, a linear journey. So it's this, okay, well, I was in denial, I was angry, so now I must start to bargain and then eventually feel sad, right? But it's not so rigid or structured like that. Folks can kind of bounce around. Right? One day they might feel really sad and start to kind of accept the reality. And then the next day they might be so angry, and then the next day they can be in denial. Okay, so it's definitely not a linear process. There have been other grief theories, I'm sure, after Kubler-Ross's. And I think in the research, there can be certain milestones people experience, right? Such as, just coming to understand, okay, yes, this, and accept the reality that this loved one has passed, but also learning on how to manage these really intense negative emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing, that a lot of times we're too linear with some of these things. Even a timeline for grief. Is there a certain timeline, right? Some people think, well, in 6 months from now, I should be better than I was 1 month from now. Does that always hold true?
No. And again, unfortunately, I think it's such a widespread assumption that it's, oh, okay, it's been, half a year, it's been a year, that I should be all, better now. I think there's certainly certain milestones that one can encounter, but it doesn't mean that, let's say if one begins to feel some sort of acceptance or recovery from the loss of a loved one, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will never feel sad about that loss ever again, right? Yeah.
So I know that we did kind of mention that grief is this idea of loss and how we process that. And some of these things we were talking about, the bigger losses in terms of family members and loved ones. What about those, I wouldn't say less significant, but the things that, like, are routines or the loss of a job? Do these grief things still hold true in those circumstances, or are they a little bit different?
I think, grief can look so different, again, across the folks, because it just depends on how much significance or importance these things have held for them, right? For example, if, working out, having that gym routine, it's, not only to exercise physically, but it's also for mental health, right? I guess it's just so subjective, right?
Mhm.
But certainly one can go through that grieving process to changes in routine. It's not necessarily having to do with losing a loved one.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes people ask, when can I expect to feel better? What would you say to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would perhaps encourage them to, well, that's the thing. There's no right answer, right? Everyone's journey is unique and different. And I think to have that kind of expectation can be kind of, maybe a bit unhelpful,
Hmm.
right? Hmm.
What are the various ways then that grief can look like? How does it manifest itself?
Grieving can involve such a wide range of intense emotions. We just discussed sadness and anger, but one can feel numb, in shock, incredibly overwhelmed, fearful, anxious, guilty, regretful. So all these really strong emotions. It can look like someone really withdrawing from their relationships, their friendships. Someone, I'm thinking when one experiences those emotions, it can be really difficult to concentrate and complete work responsibilities. It might be really tough to sleep. Some folks, that guilt, right? They feel as though, oh gosh, if that loved one can't experience happiness, then why should I? So they might really withdraw from hobbies or activities that brought them joy. So those are some examples of how grief can look.
Maybe I'll switch from talking about the grief of loved ones to maybe some of the more simpler or mundane things that we've all lost during COVID, routine, normal. What are some of the things that can happen to us if we don't acknowledge those moments of grief, or that we're not processing that grief well? What are some of the things that can happen to us as a result?
Mm-hmm. I think if we don't take that time to just kind of pause and reflect and kind of check in with ourselves and to process any kind of emotions, you know, those emotions, if we don't release them, they're kind of in there, right? They don't just magically disappear, right? And they can actually accumulate and kind of seep out in different ways, right? What I mean by that is perhaps, there's this slightly kind of aggravating situation and suddenly you're just so angry and it's just disproportionate, right? And so I think that's why it's so important to kind of, check in with oneself and acknowledge, okay, how am I actually feeling about, my favorite gym or class closing, right? And what can I do to kind of help manage those feelings of sadness or irritation or this sense of, oh gosh, I've lost control.
Any final thoughts on grief and what we can think about or take away?
I think perhaps the silver lining in all this and all our losses due to COVID is that, we're all feeling this way, right? It's kind of, we're not alone in this. We all are experiencing some kind of loss and change. And so perhaps it's that encouragement to reach out to trusted people and to just talk it out and maybe process together these emotions.
Great. All right. So this is our topic on grief. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that one takeaway is, we're all actually going through this right now. And this is our great humanity coming together, experiencing this together. So I think hopefully that can encourage us to be able to verbalize it, talk about it, reach out for help as we do so. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Elizabeth, for being a part of this. And we'll see you guys next time.
Take care.